All right, welcome in. It's March. I think it's actually the 5th of March, 2025, for anybody who's keeping track. It is HR Lunch Bunch. What that means in my world is it's noon. It's the first Wednesday of the month. That means I'm spending time with all of you who are here present and some of you who will be listening or watching on demand. We have a topic that we pick every month. This just happens to be about pay transparency. For those of you who might be new, let me know in the chat box. I've got it up, and this is a great way to communicate. It is not the only way you can communicate. Feel free to unmute yourself. You can talk to the rest of us, but the chat box is up. Let me know if you're new to Lunch Bunch. If this is your first time, I do see some names I recognize, so I'm glad that you're here. If you are new or for somehow you have forgotten who I am, I am Deborah Jeffries. I serve as the vice president of the company of HR Answers. I've been around the block just 1, 2, or 3 decades. And oh, good. Mike, welcome, newbie. Glad that you're here. I have been doing the Lunch Bunch for several decades. It actually started as one of our staff members as an idea, and we used to meet in person well before the pandemic. We used to bring lunch, we used to munch in between bites and talking. And then the little thing called the pandemic hit, and we decided we would do this virtually. And then people around the state, out of state, across the country, sometimes would actually join us for the conversation. And we just pick a topic that we think is relevant, and it's opportunity to network. And so we don't have necessarily a meal involved. However, feel free to eat yours. We like to have cameras on. We like you to unmute and talk. But truly, this is about sharing kind of what's working for you, what's not working for you, perhaps on a particular topic. It's a way to learn. I definitely put together a bit of information for people. And I want you to learn from each other. I want you to feel free to ask questions of each other and be able to have a little bit of fun as well. So the chat box is there for you to communicate, to be able to network with each other, to ask the questions, to provide resources. If there's something that you have, you're using, you're doing, you know about, you want to pass along to the rest of us, that's great. And I will tell you right here and now, kind of noodle on it in the back of your head, the person who is going to join us next month is not able to. So that means next month's topic is wide open. So I'm always interested if you guys have ideas or suggestions. And let me also do this for topics that might be germane to you, something that you're working on, something your organization is considering, something that's baffling to you. By all means, please send them my way. I would love to be able to have more. So, with that said, let's go ahead and get started a little bit. Um, my goal was kind of maybe dismissifying some concerns, or let's put some things out on the table to kind of talk about what are some of the challenges that we might be experiencing, what might be some of the opportunities with pay transparency. I think that there are some of both. Some of you might be in the know, some of you might not be in the know. As of January of this year, we've got a tremendous number of states that already have some state laws around pay transparency. They've enacted some components of this. And there appears to be, and maybe, and I'm interested in hearing from you, a growing demand. Now, I would say that there's a survey that's been put out by Bank Rate. You heard me, Bank Rate, all one word. Around 42% of Gen Z workers and 40% of millennials say that they have shared their salary information with their peers. Now, I don't know that that's really much of a surprise or mystery to some of you. And I think that some of this is bubbling up because those two generations as a whole are much more transparent in all kinds of topics. And they share. Now, I think that there's another survey that's out there by a company called Visor, Visier. And they do a lot of people analytic kinds of information and gathering. 20% in their survey of workers would prefer to keep their salaries confidential. Now, depending on what side of this equation you are on or what your organization is thinking, um, what might be some of our concerns, challenges, opportunities? What's the goal of kind of sharing? So when I think about what I think could be some of the goals, well, you tell me whether or not some of these resonate with you, don't, might have some others in place. Um, are some of your employers as you guys are, do you guys have a requirement to disclose wage or wage range informations for positions? Do we have a policy? Do we have some procedures? Sometimes being a state entity, some of our industries are basically all but requiring it. Um, is the goal for people to be able to make better educated decisions? I even see that commercial that is someone's across a negotiating table or they're in a interview and it's towards the end of it and someone's getting something on their cell phone and it says, actually a position with a salary, with a number. Have you seen that commercial? And so it's like I can actually make a decision because someone's giving me all the information. So when we talk about the goal, making pay just more transparent to everybody, what are we paying positions or what are we paying for that position? Reducing gender and racial pay gaps. There's a little bit more going on there, providing more information. Or maybe it's just because different states want different parameters. So I see a note that says we have a salary schedule and grade classifications per our labor agreement. Absolutely. So why do you think pay transparency or this is becoming more of a thing? Another note in chat makes sense when applying for a job. Gives you whether an idea if you want to apply or not, right? I mean, if we have at least an idea of like what's my salary requirements? What am I looking for? Does this job even meet that? Now, sometimes salary is negotiable. Sometimes there might be something in there. Well, in the state of Oregon, we also have Oregon Pay Equity Act. We've got that we have to deal with. Maybe not quite as negotiable as it used to be. We pay based on your experience. Okay. Again, pay equity. Um, Another note, we are wide open. I hate posting the range as everyone probably thinks they deserve the top of the range, right? Well, if we're really clear about what the top of the range represents, right? Are we reviewing our pay ranges? Um, when do we move? How I think one of the big questions is how do I have the potential to make more money? If I come in at the bottom of the range, how do I get to the top of the range? What does that look like? And in some respects, right, Mike? What does pay equity mean to you? And I don't know if you're asking me specifically, but just in general, from an organizational standpoint. From an organizational standpoint, what's our pay philosophy? What's our compensation philosophy? What are we paying for? What does that mean? I mean, if we have pay transparency, everybody, it's an open book, right? That negotiating piece, the thing that people often talk about in terms of who negotiates better, well, that's kind of off the table. Well, then what are we paying for? Skills, knowledge, certain abilities. What's important to the organization? What has value to the position? Then we're on the same playing field. So, again, if you haven't been with me before, questions to ask you. How much, I think, you know, this is a yes no question. Are you seeing an increased demand for pay transparency in the workplace? Yes, no. And if yes, how, where, are you seeing it? What's been your exposure? And has it impacted any of your current practices? Maybe we change current practices to conversations in the workplace. And if so, how? In what way? Rick already says no. Okay, well, that's simple, Rick. Thank you. Adora, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to, what I'm seeing more so is gathering comps that they see as comps, like the same position name or similar title, and then wondering why they're not at at that range. That's what I see
Mm,
more. Can you review my compensation because the state of Oregon or the city of so and so pays more, or I'd like to uh, get more money. Basically, that's what I see more, at least for us.
okay, good observation. Okay, and some of you are not really seeing it come up at all. Um, Resulting from posting the range, we have to explain more about how to get the max and how fast to get there. Okay,
Mhm.
there we go. Which in some respects, with some people um, wanting to have, come into the workplace and wanting to move up quickly or get promoted, or what does it take? In some respects, I think that has maybe forced some employers, some departments, some managers to truly think about those things, to have answers to some of those questions where they haven't had, or they haven't thought enough about that, or maybe been as thorough about it. And so now maybe we actually have to be more thoughtful about what does it mean to be successful in this department, or how do we quantify progress, and how are we looking at those things? Let alone, an organization always has to be able to afford the pay increases. Make no mistake about it. I mean, you can have stellar employees doing stellar work. If the revenue isn't coming in, or the grant money isn't coming in, or there's no budget dollars, we, it's hard to pay people more money if there isn't dollars to be able to do it. So there is a balance here in terms of being able, we've got to be able to afford it. And if you spend any time in the compensation realm, the movement of salary and activity over many, many years, 3% has been kind of a going rate. Now, some industries, some professions have had a much higher, based on the demand. And yet, I think this year it was like more like 2.8 to 3.2. That's not a lot of movement in salary. So when we think about what is it we're doing with pay raises and increases in general. So we've got other questions coming in. So once pay has been negotiated by contract, what is your recommendation to respond to an employee request for re-review of their pay range? Well, okay, so back to original thought processes of what's our policy say about, do we do it? Do we not do it in terms of review? When would we? When wouldn't we? And I don't know what you have, if we have no collective bargaining agreement, okay. Again, what's our, not necessarily compensation philosophy? That's kind of step one, but what's your compensation practices? What do we do? When do we do it? How do we do it? And if you don't have any of that kind of spelled out, when was the last time a review was looked at in terms of pay? When we talk about pay ranges, when was the last time you looked at the quote going rate for a position, uh, uh, a salary review? Not necessarily the review for that, but in terms of uh, using salary um, data to do a salary review for a position. When was the last time there was a position review for salary? If you're not doing that with some regularity, now it doesn't have to necessarily be every year. Maybe it's every other year, maybe it's every 2 years. Do you have some? We've worked with clients before where they haven't done a salary review in like 5 years. that might be a little tardy. That's not good.
Just,
Um, go
just to
ahead.
follow up, Deborah, we do a comp study every time we do a contract. So,
There you go.
um,
Right.
that's when we do the comp study. All those outcomes, are communicated, spelled out, and then so ironically, negotiation is negotiation, so I'll just leave it at that. So this is all negotiated, the salary schedule, and then the comp study outcomes and how we did a restructure. I think somebody asked about a reset. We did a new salary structure with aligned grade classifications. But I was surprised by an employee coming and asking for a compensation review since we had just finished the contract. So that was where my question was, is what was
Yeah.
what would be a recommended approach for that when we just did it?
And part of that might also be what's the why behind that? Why are you asking? Did we overlook something? Right? This is our practice. Did they miss something in the explanation or information or whatever? What's the why? Do you have a sometimes words are difficult. What's the opportunity for them to disagree with what was put out? Um,
Mm.
and um, and if they do or don't, how do we handle that? So sometimes even educating our employees about the process of a salary review and gathering that data because maybe they don't understand how that information is pulled together in terms of multiple sources, um, comparable sources, and things like that. Geographical differentials might be in play depending on. So being able to explain that to employees, maybe they're fairly new, they don't understand, they've never been through it. So when we talk about an organization with the state of Oregon having pay equity, being able to do a quote audit every 3 years to make sure that we are still in compliance with equity, making sure what are your comparable characteristics and make sure that you are being thoughtful about those. How often have you taken a look at that prior to what was our practice before pay equity? What is it now? Or those organizations that adopted that early, they should already have been doing. Okay, talk slower, Deborah. Already have undergone a pay equity audit in terms of the 3 year process. If you didn't start right away, maybe you're already, most organizations might be approaching the second time frame of an audit. If you're late to the party in that regards, then you'd be approaching the first one. So depending on your question, Mike, in terms of a reset on in terms of base pay, um, but being able to take a look at that if you one of the things that can sometimes happen is when you're losing employees. Why are we losing employees? Do we believe that we're losing them because of pay? Do you know what your pay is comparative to competitors? When it comes to pay inside your organization, do you believe you're below market, at market, or above market? If you don't know, it's good to know and find out. And if you're below market, why? If you're above market, perhaps you've been intentional with that because you're trying to attract people. If you're above market, but you haven't been intentional about that, then that could be a potential for retention, but that also might be retention of people you may not want to keep. They're not going anywhere because they can't make that kind of money anywhere else. So when you think about where you're at, why are you paying what you're paying? Does it make sense? So, and someone who does compensation work or understands it, and it's not intended to be a commercial. HR Answers, for those of you who don't know, have we just turned 40 this month. So we've been around for 40 years. Over 40% of our business traditionally over all those years has been compensation related. It's a good portion of what we do. We find that oftentimes a lot of folks that we work with don't understand comp, don't like compensation, um, that it can be sometimes tedious. There's a lot of steps to it and whatnot. Purchasing salary surveys is not an inexpensive endeavor. So we do a lot of that kind of work, and we can help people in terms of, again, below, at, above market, why, do a lot of pay equity work, be able to do those audits, be able to assist and look at it from kind of sometimes a neutral perspective, being able to see where people are at, but also ask all the questions that sometimes people don't know to ask, or when we're working with a board of directors and they're trying to help an organization, or when we've got somebody who is looking at this more from a purely financial standpoint, but what's the employee and hiring and retention impact kind of standpoint, and ask questions, because some of those are, you've got two people in the same position. Are they being treated the same way in regards to their pay when it comes to bonuses, when it comes to base pay, when it comes to increases, when it comes to those pay equity, comparable characteristics? Are all things lining up, or is somebody ending up with more money than somebody else? Why? Can we defend the decisions that we've made? It's just making sure that what you've put out, like in a handbook, is lining up with the decisions that have been made along the way. Because when we think about, some common pay transparency law requirements, disclosing pay for the position. Some states allow for fixed pay rates. Pay ranges must be set in good faith. Timing of disclosure requirements does vary by states. So some of you might be in multiple states. Um, Sometimes the requirement is in a job posting. Others requires that it's upon request. Some benefits are offered for the position. Obviously, we want, anti-retaliation protections. So depending on what state you're in, or if you're exploring being in a new state, as we have more remote work, this might also be an element of pay transparency conversations in your workplace, or the fact that when we had the pandemic, people ended up in other states because they moved. Do you want to be operating in those states? Right. So most of have some kind of, have to have at least one employee in the state for something to apply. So a lot of times being able to maintain your records of disclosure, or any civil penalties, there might be some of these little lesser known components of these, because depending, it could be anywhere from like $300 to $25,000 for multiple offenses, depending again on what state we're in. And if we're not paying attention to some of these things, again, as you're expanding or thinking about going into other states, these are things that we might want to think about in terms of impacts on our practices, or thinking about exploring where we're at. So, uh, clarification, Mike, is that where an audit comes in? At what part? My apologies. Which part? Because in the state of Oregon, the audit is every 3 years. It is recommended that you have an audit, and you can quote do that internally, or you can ask someone externally to perform that. And again, it's to kind of audit yourself to make sure that you're still staying with the comparable characteristics, that everything. So, like, I can give you an example that we had, one situation with a client, most recently, where two employees in the same position, and when it came to bonuses, and how people were being treated, the answer was not exactly 100%. It wasn't the same. So going back to, sometimes we will update, a company will update information in an employee handbook, and in the employee handbook, um, we have forgotten what we have said that we're going to do. And so a supervisor might give a discretionary bonus or something like that. And the answer is, but our policy says we do it this way now. And so we are actually aren't following our new guidelines. So it isn't necessarily that it has to be a big, hairy deal. It's just a friendly reminder, or that, what's the formula of the math? How did you get someplace? Can you, as a someone coming in from the outside, can you show us what the math might look like. So it's just trying to make sure that an organization is being thoughtful and has the details behind the decision making. Okay.
Yeah, we're a new client, so I think we'll be working with you closely with that. So
Good, good, good. And I should be really upfront with you all. I know enough to be dangerous. You all, if you are working with us or even think about wanting to work with us, you want to spend time with Jennifer. You want to spend time with Lori. You want to spend time with Anna. These are your people who are more experts in this area than I am. My job is to facilitate conversations with you all. Because otherwise we could spend hours with all your Q and A's. And I see someone smiling. Um, Kylie, don't be smiling at me there. Um, anyway, so um, but being able to be thoughtful about what you're doing and how you're doing it, because someone from if someone from the outside were to come in and ask, they're going to ask. We're not reporting anybody to the outside world on anything. That's not our job. Our job is to help you get to where you want to be in terms of your goals with pay equity and whatnot. So, um, and you tell me, should employers consider voluntarily providing pay information, even if we're not required or pressured or some other kind of scenario? Do you think that that's a good thing? How does that strike you? Because right now, I mean, Washington, how many of you are in Washington? Do I have any of you who have locations in Washington? Hey, Robin does. Is she the only one? Okay, Jennifer does too. Good. So in Washington, we definitely this is a requirement. You guys know pay transparency is a thing. Okay. And we've got one person that says, not really, wouldn't be my thing. So I think that this is one of those, it as I kind of mentioned earlier, sharing salary information isn't quite as taboo as it once was. I remember the days when it was kind of like, you do not discuss salary with anybody ever, you know, confidential. Well, we always know that people were still talking about it. I mean, it happens, right, in the shadows. Um, but this is kind of where pay transparency and our pay equity is overlapping in a lot of respects. And so we have this pay equity component in terms of what we're doing. And to be perfectly frank, because Washington has it, I have to think in all sincerity, it's just a matter of time before it's a requirement for Oregon. And that's honestly one of the reasons why I thought this would be a discussion for some of us and sharing what you're seeing, hearing, discussions you're having, what are applicants asking about, what's kind of happening on your end. Because I think we're gonna be headed this way. I have no my magic 8 ball is not giving me any indicators as to how soon. Um, but I think that this is, when you think about this, um, do you have when you think about your compensation system, um, how is that articulated throughout the organization? Do people understand it? Do people what you do, why you do it, how you do it? Because that's going to be more of that transparency component that's going to come up. It's not going to be just about pay. It's like, what do we pay for? Why do we do it? How does it work? How do I make more money? What when would we have freezes? When would things not kick in? Are we, how many of you have open discussions about compensation inside your organization? And I agree, Rick. It'd be nice to hear from those who are currently doing some of this, what's working and not working. It's the awkward silence.
I guess I have a question. When it comes to pay transparency, is it for anybody in the company, or is it based on like other people in my sort of position that I would get to know that information? Or is it anyone out there that you are able to sort of inquire about?
Okay, so I think that's a good clarification question. So typically, when I'm talking about pay transparency, it's on behalf of the organization that is being transparent about what we pay for our positions. So when we're recruiting,
Mhm.
typically the conversation has been we're putting out what we pay when we're hiring somebody. When we have an open job, we're putting out maybe a pay range so that people know what it is, that we're advertising it. It's in the job posting, that internal applicants can see it, external applicants can see that, that it's not a mystery. It's not the statement pay will be based on experience. There actually is a number or set of numbers provided. So it's not about you and quote your only your position and quote you would know or you get to know or you get to ask. This is, as an organization, we have pay transparency, and it may start out as we're starting to do this with open positions, but the idea is soon, if that becomes the quote starting point, it's going to be all open positions going forward, and I'm going to see that someone's being hired in a position like me. So let's just say, for example, someone got hired 4 years ago, and we're hiring for a similar same position today. I'm going to see what we're paying that position today. I was hired 4 years ago. Is it similar? Are they being offered a whole lot more? Which should make us be thinking about what are we doing internally for our existing employees. Now, with pay equity, we should be comparable based on what are our characteristics. So if there is a major discrepancy, then what are all of our key characteristics that we're basing any of those other items on, or those items that would be making the pay different, right? Because if everything's equal, shouldn't that be pretty comparable? So that would cause an organization, I think, to have some conversations in that regards, and it certainly would have the employee. The state of Oregon has some key elements in terms of those key characteristics. You within that was an element, you get to you can decide what there's some wiggle room within those. And so the answer is yes, and you can make some decisions around those, what that's going to look like. So, like experience can be a key characteristic. So, what level, how much experience is that going to look like? Knowledge, key characteristic. What's the knowledge base that is going to be the requirement for the job? So, what are your key characteristics? So being able to be thoughtful. So if you haven't already got some of those or measured some of those or made some decisions, then you're going to want to talk about those with someone who's going to be in the know, so you can start applying those to all of your positions. So that should be a baseline discussion so we can make measurements against each of them. How many of you have already gone through and done, well, maybe I should ask a question. I've got about 17 of you on so far. How many of you already have done pay equity and you've gone through and done your key characteristics? And you remember with chat, you can also private message so that if for some reason you don't want to share that with everybody, you don't have to. You can just share it
Hello,
with.
I've had my hand up for a minute. I'd love
Oh,
to add to the conversation.
please, I apologize.
Oh,
My
that's
my
okay. I know how
apologies.
these things work. They hide Yeah, well, to answer your roast, I'm Brenda Sangel from the Marion Soil and Water Conservation District here in Oregon. We are a special district of the government, so we have different ways of, we have public records requests.
Yes.
Every year, there are people that reach out to us and ask us for all of our salaries and names, and we just can't share personal, but we do have to give that to them, and you can go on a database and look up what all of us make because we
Right.
work in government. So we're transparent at that very public level, and we did do a pay equity study, and going through that, you know, it was hard for me. I came from private. I worked in private in my first career. Now I'm in government. It was really hard for me to understand the transparency of sharing your salary and what you make and what people are earning. But I think once you go through the pay equity study and you come out of that, either with some adjustments or find you're in compliance, I think you understand it's not a big deal then to be transparent. You're showing that. I think when we weren't transparent is maybe for competition reasons between jobs, or somebody was getting paid a little more than somebody should have been paid and you don't want that out there. I mean, I don't know what the uncomfortability would be about it, but once you do the pay equity study, you see where that's at and you make corrections, and you want to share that. You want to share that everybody's making money in the range that there should be. And so we share everything. Our whole staff gets our salary administration plan, the salary table, all our job descriptions, tell you which pay range, start and finish. And I've been working with HR answers right now, getting my salary table completed. So they've been a really big help with that. So anyway, that's my 3 cents.
Oh, no, I appreciate that very much. So yeah, so part of this is, again, public sector, private sector, different requirements, and what does that look like, and who has access to the information when doing a sometimes and some of you are providing private messages. So a lot of times with compensation, it's still one of those kind of more sensitive topics, and um, ownership or key players have some sensitivities about, I don't want people to know what I'm making, or I don't think it's appropriate for people to know what other people are making, and don't want that shared. And so there might be some hesitancy. Some people, some organizations have made a decision that they're not going to be in compliance with this particular state law for any number of reasons. They're going to, they're still in a kind of a wait and see mode. They're going to wait until someone comes knocking before they worry about it. And I can appreciate all of those things and even more. We've had clients that are in all of those situations. Um, so typically, well, I don't know if the typically is even the right answer, because there are employers at all of those different levels of whether we're going to comply or not comply, or we think that we did. Some people think that there have been many organizations that have thought that um, I am an equal opportunity employer, so there's pay equity. No. Some people have thought, well, we did uh, we had some considerations, we've done some work around, we've done some things so to make sure that we're good in terms of the genders, pay equity. No, that's not exactly it, because it's not about gender. It's about all positions. It's about the comparable characteristics. Anybody who's in the job, it doesn't matter who it is. What is it that we're trying to accomplish in terms of making sure that we are uh, fair and equitable to all within? If you'd only have one person in the position, then there really isn't anything to quote compare it to them to. When we come to a second person in the job, then are we treating everybody fairly? Did we offer the same opportunities? Again, we can have bonuses. We can have um, uh, when you have time off, and you have banks of time, leave time. How are you paying that out? Did you pay it out equally to everybody in the same way? Or did you do something different for somebody? Why? How did you come to that conclusion or determination? And so being able to think about salary in all or dollars in all of its components. And so the element in terms of pros and cons. Um, Typically, when we talk about when someone's asking for information, they might be asking for themselves. And so, clarity. If we're talking about a transparent process in general, then an organization, a phrase that an old, I don't know if it's old management, just a management process, open book management means that an organization is sharing all of its, like, we're making money, we're not making money, we're profitable, we're breaking even. So pay, if it's a financial component of our operation, which it is, then we can be transparent about this is what our pay is for these positions. This is what we pay for. This is what we don't pay for. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. A lot of times when we work with an organization, they'll say, we're doing a compensation study. This organization is helping us with, we're taking a look at. Sometimes we work with organizations and we go in and we do uh, by division or by department, and we'll find that a department is paying people well above market, like well above market compared to others in their industry, in the region. And the answer is if they are looking to uh, do pay increases for 2026, this department is already 10% above market. So then the organization has to make a decision about whether or not are they even going to be offering that department a pay increase next year because they're already well above market and everybody else in the organization is either at market or below market. Well, they find these things out. So an organization can decide how they want to do that. Or if they find out they're paying well below market, then there's going to be a strategy for how they get people up to market. They may not tell everybody how they're going to do it, but they're going to build a structure, a strategy for getting people there. So the push and pull or the how they're going to share that information depends on part of the culture of the organization. How much do they feel comfortable sharing, and what's going to be appropriate, maybe executives versus non versus other, board of directors versus. So there's not, I don't think, an easy answer to the question, Rick, in terms of the push and pull. If you've got a single person asking, then also, my only hesitation is making sure that it's an answer for them. And my hope is that it's answering their question, but it's not then necessarily always for public consumption, because also employees don't always know, kind of like the old game of telephone. I'm going to answer your question. Do they convey the same information consistently to everybody? Or do they put their own spin on things? And then we have different information being shared that isn't accurate information that then we have to clean up the mess. So, how do we want to share information to make sure that everybody's on the same page? Um, and I'm seeing other messages coming in or other questions. Um, so, um, I'm even before working with HR answers, I'm always a fan of working with people who give me quantifiable, statistically accurate pay, salary, compensation data so that I'm working with good numbers. If I'm only pulling numbers from my accountant who works with other plumbing companies, that probably isn't your best compensation data to be basing my compensation data on. Because it's not got all the pieces that you need. And you all know that you also want total compensation, which then is what are all your benefits that we're paying into? What are all your other pieces that are there as well? Um, so, and you tell me, some of you have already said you're a little uncomfortable with pay transparency is kind of as a conversation. Do you think that it could be helpful to employers? And if so, how? Where would be the benefit of having more pay transparency in your workplace or your activities? Even if it's not a requirement by law, are there benefits? Okay, we could take away some of the mystery. What else might be true? I agree. It creates the transparency. And if we're transparent about this, does that lead to an image, a reputation of transparency elsewhere? Okay. Decrease anxiety around pay. Okay. Retention rate. I think so. Right. I think they're also, based on some of these answers, there's a little bit of a hidden theme behind the scenes, which could be what? Okay, better morale, engagement, health or unhealth of the organization, right? Mel, you and I are tracking trust, right? And that's my first one, is I think there's more. I think there can be building a great deal of trust in terms of sharing information. And if not everybody is quote doing it, and we're sharing information, we're opening things up, right? So trust, retention, more talent acquisition in that regards, productivity. I think there can be some risk mitigation when we bring things up and we're sharing and we're open and we're discussing things with folks. So I think these could be helpful things. I don't think these are the only things, but so again, depending on how big your HR department is, what kind of conversations you're having with whomever, might this merit a conversation within your organization to explore, consider having this be more of a thing? So when we think about some of the, well, we've got some federal legal considerations. There's no, at this time, there's no federal comprehensive federal pay transparency law. You'll notice that I said at this time. Again, I could get out my crystal ball. National Labor Relations Act protects employees' right to communication about wages, and our Federal Pay Act of 1963, because I'm sure we all remember that, our sex-based wage discrimination in the workplace. So just remember that we have those. So we've got some elements that are kind of, underlining to support the transparency in terms of, again, those generations that are saying we want to talk more about, we want to see it, it's okay to talk about it, and let alone our own local pay equity laws, right? So employees must be paid equally for work based on those comparable characteristics. The job description is, not the only component here. Discrepancies in pay must be justified by one or more bona fide factors. Pay equity issues cannot be fixed through a reduction in pay. So we cannot reduce pay. We can't penalize an employee because most post required notices So we must post any required notices in regards to that. And Washington largely mirrors Oregon's pay equity stuff, aside from the fact that they have the pay transparency provision. So again, making sure that if you're operating in multiple states that you know that and that that's clearly articulated like in your handbook and whatnot. Okay. So what becomes our challenges or obstacles, do you think, if it becomes more commonplace? Well, and I think, Mike, this kind of goes with the question. What if you're above market and pay ranges for positions are posted? Is that an obstacle if we got pay transparency? Or is that a good thing? Wouldn't you have more people applying for your positions? People who are working and even people who aren't working if you're paying above the market? Wouldn't you perhaps be attracting more talent, more experienced talent? Okay, what other challenges or obstacles? If people are currently, so Mike, your follow-up question, what about people who are in those positions and it's not a reduction in pay? It's not to reduce pay.
So basically, if you're doing a market study and you find the comparable rates that you're above market and it doesn't align with your equity and your budget, is that a way to be more transparent? Is to repost the position of what the minimum and maximum range for that position is?
I actually want you to ask that question again. If I've got people who are being paid X and now I'm posting the position and basically what you're saying is we're we're overpaying you and you can see that we're overpaying you. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. So the key is that obviously that we're not we can't penalize the employee and we're not going to change their pay. We would probably have a conversation with them about the fact that we did the market study and we already had a conversation with you about the fact that you're above market and we're not going to change your pay, but there will be no pay increases. Now, that could I think a challenge from that could be that I'm not I'm not satisfied with that. I think I want pay increases like everybody else. And I could leave in hopes that I will be working someplace that will do, annual pay increases or something like that. However, the market would suggest that they're getting paid above the market for the work, the level of work that they're at. So if they go someplace else, what is the chances that they actually would make more or that there'd be opportunities to quote make more because that is quote the going rate. So by posting it, you would hopefully, and in all seriousness, Mike, they would not be learning this information when we're posting the job, that we would have had a conversation with them prior to that. Because if that's when they're learning or how they're learning, then I think there's a better way to do that because that would feel crummy. And that's probably a nice word. That would feel awful if I'm learning that I know I'm making more money and this is the way I'm learning I'm not going to get any pay increases. That's a passive aggressive kind of way of approaching it. Yes? Okay. Other people weighing in on this question? Didn't I say at the beginning this should be a real discussion? Am I getting I want to do all the talking. And this may not even be just discussions in the workplace, because remember, it's unlawful in terms of an employment practice for an employer to discharge, demote, suspend, discriminate, retaliate because an employee has inquired about or discussed, disclosed about their pay, their wages, with another employee. So, if pay transparency as a concept, a comfort level is, even if it's not a formal thing, even if it's an informal thing, um, we want to be really careful. And that, even if nothing else, making sure our managers and supervisors are well aware of this so that there's nothing that they would say or do, to make sure that they're not accidentally uh, causing the organization any challenges. Make sense? Okay. So how might pay transparency requirements alter any of your practices to pre-existing employees? Based on what you're doing now, what can you think might be true here? Okay, so if you're looking in one area, look at all areas, right? In terms of positions. And you may have no reason to, and maybe you've recently, I mean, to Adora's comment earlier, we just recently did a study. So maybe you're not doing the whole organization. Maybe you're doing, anytime you have a new position, we would be, looking at something. So that might be a thing. But you're doing it position by position. I think it even sort of gets to the question that Mike had earlier. People are changing jobs because they think they can get more money at another company, right? So um, the comment in terms of it might be more out there than we think. So is this, you know, like anything, if we think it's kind of taboo, you know, we discuss it behind in the shadows, as it were. Um, and the answer is, but if it's out there and people are more comfortable with it, that doesn't mean it's not an awkward conversation, but so being able to kind of think about evaluating your policies and your practices. So as we kind of wrap up some of our time here, establishing pay ranges for positions, compliance strategies for ensuring all job postings are updated with your pay, multi-state employers, obviously, wherever your jobs are, wherever your companies are, your locations, whoops, hiring and job postings, remote workforce, right? Job opportunities, employee retention and salary negotiation activities, train employees involved in the hiring process. Do we have panels? How are we doing that, so that they can respond appropriately to pay and benefit inquiries that might come across, right? So I think those things, in terms of taking a look at what your activities or current practices are. And I think preparing for or looking at or having internal discussions, um, more requests around pay information, I think will become our new normal. So we shouldn't be shocked or surprised. And do you have easily, readily access for information? Um, and when I say employers kind of being prepared, I think that that's also our managers and supervisors. How do you want them to handle? Do you want them to funnel things to HR or to a specific person? What's kind of the narrative there? Again, pay philosophy, compensation policy. How comfortable are we having that being shared with candidates, employees? Um, do we know where to find it? Do we know what it means? Right? And so being able to have, again, back to those hiring managers, supervisors, whether they're hiring or otherwise, how are pay ranges established? Do they know? And where does the data kind of come from? Market competitiveness. How does remote work factor in if it does? Differentials. Now, you can change the vocabulary. A lot of times our folks don't understand how compensation's even determined. Do we want to educate them a little bit about them? Do we want to start conducting pay audits? I mean, should we as an employer be considering that with pay equity for Oregon? Yes. So I think you're going to see more states having pay transparency. I truly mark my words for Oregon. Um, more employees in other states. So just in general, it'll be a slow rollout perhaps, but how is that if we've got it, if you've got or Washington is, but your Oregon state employees aren't? Do you just want to make it a lot of Washington employers that have Oregon, they're just doing it at Oregon too, right? They're not keeping it separate, they're just covering everybody. So what might be true for you? Some employers may move faster, right, than even required. So some can see the writing on the wall. Some Oregon employers are already doing it. They're just going for it. Employers may, more easily discover um, pay raises and pay equity claims. These things might be going up, and I think that could be one of the challenges or obstacles if we're not thoughtful about what we're doing or why we're doing it or how we handle these things. We could see more concerns being broached by employees. Um, Decisions more effective and efficient. I think we need to think about what that can look like for us, and start talking about this. How how what does that look like for us from a profitability standpoint, right? Because if it hasn't occurred to us, what might that look like? How does that play in? So for HR and finance to be spending some time talking to each other, I think that could also be beneficial to us. Um, so to your point, Kelly, yeah, how does our total package, our rewards, all of it together go? So based on this, again, if you're new to a lunch bunch, I often just kind of ask the questions. Anything that kind of was brought up for you? Is there something here that kind of sparks, like, not like you don't have enough on your to-do list already in HR? We're only ending the first quarter. I'm sure you have plenty of goals. Is there anything here that says, ooh, I need to start working on that, or I need to start having some questions? Who will you share the information with? Who needs to know something? And from that, where will you go? What will you kind of do next? Not trying to add to your list, just kind of want to, help you out a little bit maybe. And obviously, if you have other questions, we can continue talking. Our time is definitely up. And again, April 2nd is going to be our next time frame of gathering. I have to figure out what we're going to talk about. And then May 7th will be the next program, and we will be talking about supporting workplace wellness through kind of mental health awareness. And I actually have, oh, and I have a little extra letters there. And I actually have somebody from Canopy EAP coming in to join us for that conversation. Her name is Michelle. So we'll have a guest joining us for that conversation. So as I officially wrap up our time, I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us for the conversation. I appreciate the comments in the chat. It was brought a pretty active chat box in that regards. So thank you for being part of this one. I will officially close off the recording But if people want to hang out and chat a little bit longer, we certainly can do that. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful March. Happy early St. Patty's Day. And I look forward to seeing you again in the future. Everybody take care and have a good rest of your day.